Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Dr. Kathy Schuler, and I am the Chief Academic Officer for the Orange County Public School District in Florida, the ninth largest in the nation. I will be your facilitator this afternoon and moderating a question and answer session after the presentation. At that time, I ask that you type your questions in the chat space. It is a pleasure to introduce our speakers for a policy and practice lens on dyslexia. Dr. Melissa Weber-Mayrer is the Director of the Office of Approaches to Teaching and Professional Learning at the Ohio Department of Education. Office units include the Department Learning Management System for Educator Learning, Personalized Learning Approaches to Teaching, Ohio's literacy legislation, and the statewide implementation of evidence-based language and literacy teaching. Dr. Weber-Mayrer is the Federal Project Director for $78.2 million in literacy grants focused on raising literacy achievement from birth to grade 12, including learners with reading difficulties. Dr. Karen Sanders is a state coordinator for Ohio with Region 8 Comprehensive Center and Senior Research Associate with RMC Research Corporation. For more than a decade, Dr. Sanders has worked in partnership with SEAs on a variety of systems change initiatives and has prior education experience at the local, regional, state, and national levels. And finally, Dr. Sarah Sayko is a technical assistant specialist with Region 8 Comprehensive Center and is the Deputy Director of the National Center of Improving Literacy, NISL. NISL's mission is to provide evidence-based resources for improving reading outcomes for children with or at risk for literacy-related disabilities, including dyslexia. In this role, Dr. Sayko leads the parent and family strand of work and seeks to improve families' access to and use of evidence-based literacy information. Please join me as I welcome our presenters. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. The title of our presentation is A Policy and Practice Lens on Dyslexia, and it's being presented by a team from the Region 8 Comprehensive Center, the Ohio Department of Education, and in conjunction with the Literacy Work Group of the CC Network. I wanted to begin by thanking the Ohio Literacy Team on behalf of the Region 8 Comprehensive Center for the opportunity to support this work in Ohio. So the bulk of our presentation stems from and highlights this work over the last year and a half. So our presentation team includes myself, Karen Sanders, and I serve as a Ohio coordinator with the Region 8 Comprehensive Center. Sarah Sayko, who's a technical assistant specialist with the Comprehensive Center. So we have three parts to our presentation today. The first part is a review of policy priorities, context, and alignment. We're going to go through these slides fairly quickly, but thought it was important to just present this perspective before moving on. Secondly, we'll talk about a system-wide commitment to professional learning. And then thirdly, evidence-based practices and multi-tiered system of support. And about midway through this presentation, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, who will complete the remainder of the presentation. Just a little bit of orientation to the comprehensive centers for those of you who might not be very familiar with them. Here's a map, and there are 19 regional centers around the country serving all the states and one national center. And the Region 8 Center serves the states of Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio. And of course, we're highlighting Ohio today. Okay, so moving on to the policy priorities, context, and alignment. This slide shows the Department of Education strategic plan, which was developed in 2018 called Each Child, Our Future. It drives the work of the Department of Education and policy for education throughout the state. This was led by the State Superintendent of Public Instruction and the State Board of Education, and it was designed to ensure that each student is challenged, prepared, and empowered for his or her future by way of an excellent pre-K through 12 education. And it was built by Ohioans for Ohioans. More than 150 Ohio-based partners participated in town hall meetings and various conversations to agree on this strategic plan. The strategic plan is a little longer document. This is the placemat, as everyone likes to call it. And this sort of shows at a glance the contents of the strategic plan. And then interfacing with the strategic plan for the department is the statewide literacy plan, which was revised in 2020. And it serves as a guide to evidence-based language and literacy teaching and learning for all learners from birth through grade 12, with the vision that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills to become proficient learners. Strategy 2 addresses support for every principal to be highly effective, especially those leading schools that serve the neediest of children. Strategy 3, improve targeted supports and professional learning so teachers can deliver excellent instruction today, tomorrow, and throughout their careers. Strategy 4, work together with parents, caregivers, and community partners to help schools meet the needs of the whole child. And strategy 8, promote the importance of early learning and expand access to quality early learning experiences. So this overall plan to raise literacy achievement and these strategies drives the literacy work in Ohio. This is a cross-agency and cross-office initiative and extends into the local level with local literacy plans reflecting these same priorities. What is dyslexia? We thought we'd talk about that just a minute. Here's the definition of dyslexia as defined by Ohio Revised Code. The disorder is neurological in origin and is characterized by unexpected difficulties with accurate or fluent word recognition, by poor spelling and decoding disabilities not consistent with the person's intelligence, motivation, or sensory capabilities. You'll see here on the right is, again, a definition by the National Center for Improving Literacy, stating basically that the dyslexia is brain-based. It does impact the ability to read, and it addresses several myths associated with dyslexia, and that a myth is that students with dyslexia can't learn to read. Indeed, they can, with evidence-based practices and explicit instruction, but it may require more effort. Another sort of myth is that children with dyslexia see everything backwards and reversed, and that's a myth as well. This is Our Dyslexia Children, which is a documentary that was filmed in Ohio. In 2010, it was filmed recently, but it's based on a story that began in 2010, where a group of parents in a suburban school district near Columbus discovered that their children had something in common. They could not read. This is an excellent high-performing school district, and kids were not reading. Well, they band together, and together they filed a systemic group complaint with the Ohio Department of Education, and the district was found in violation on all allegations. They then formed a partnership and again lobbied the legislature, and they were successful. They won. This documentary, it was required reading for the professional learning series, which we'll talk about in a minute. And it chronicles quite effectively the perspectives of both students and parents struggling with reading difficulties. It's very profound, very worth watching. And as a result of the documentary, in large part, led to the dyslexia legislation that now is in effect in Ohio. So it had quite a policy impact and impact on the education for students in this particular school district and around the state. Ohio has several dyslexia support laws enacted in February of 2021, and these are in large part, again, the work of this coalition of parents in Ohio. It does require, in general, early screening and identification of students with dyslexia with several components, which we won't go into detail here, but this was a foundation also for the professional learning series that we conducted. And then we have 4 slides, data profile slides, that show reading scores in Ohio and implications for associated dyslexia concerns. It's important to say also that when we began the professional learning series, each participant was asked to reflect on, based on these student performance data, how do you see your work represented in the data. So their work was grounded in the data, and the implications they drew for themselves and their roles were based in the data. The first slide shows disadvantaged kindergartners, most likely not to be on track for language and literacy. And you'll see that special populations of students scored disproportionately to the total population. Also on the right, percent proficient on third grade reading. Ohio does have a third grade reading guarantee, and you'll see that students with disabilities score lower than their peers, disproportionately lower. This slide is an equity lens about potential discrimination issues. In Ohio, and this is based on data from Each Child Means Each Child, which is the state plan for the Office for Exceptional Children. So these are special ed data. And they have found that it's 2 times as likely that Black students are identified with intellectual disabilities, that Black students are placed in more restrictive settings, and that Black students are removed for discipline. It's also 3 times as likely that Black students are identified with emotional disturbance, and they're more likely to be expelled. Conversely, educators are less likely to identify Black students with speech and language impairments, which could lead to early identification for dyslexia. So this sort of just puts an equity lens on the data. This again was something that the participants participating in the professional learning series were asked to consider. This one shows third grade reading retention, the percentage by race and ethnicity. You can see on the left that the total retained for third grade students was over 3,000. White students accounted for over 30%, while Black students accounted for over 49% of the students. And then you can see other subgroups in between. And this slide shows the potential impact of economically disadvantaged students. Again, the total retained for third grade, over 3,000. And of those, over 92% of them were economically disadvantaged students who were retained in third grade. We're going to move now to the commitment on professional learning and talk about how it was a system-wide attempt. And one of the goals, the major goal, was cross-office coherence for policy implementation. And toward this goal, there were 6 offices across the Department of Education who were involved in the training all at the same time and were asked to make connections to their current roles and work. So it was very customized across different parts of the agency, as well as various roles and responsibilities. Also, the training included Ohio state support teams. Ohio has 16 state support teams that serve districts in their region. And within that regional literacy network, there are 16 support teams who have a variety of various expertise relating to literacy. You see those on the left, including early literacy. Also, some regional literacy specialists newly funded for urban support, which is a focus of this particular summit. And then you can see more broadly, the regional support teams are embedded in the larger statewide system of support that includes the State Literacy Network, the 16 state support teams, and Ohio's 51 education service centers that are county-based. This is an outline of the professional learning series. The first section included what was provided for the Ohio Department of Education staff. There were 6 sessions. The second section, the regional literacy staff, and there were 6 sections there as well. And then the State Literacy Network professional learning community sessions, which were coaching in nature, and there were 4 there. We did include the dates and the time segments to show you a sense of how this played out over time, over several months. This was planned for this year under the annual service plan for the Region 8 Comprehensive Center. And when it became apparent the dyslexia legislation was going to pass, we heard it was on the governor's desk for signature. We ramped this up pretty quickly and have been going very systematically through these different audiences. And again, you can sort of see how we paced that out. And the pacing seemed to work pretty well. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Karen. We're going to dive in now to evidence-based practices and multi-tiered system of support. So based on the outline of the sessions that Karen just previewed for you, we're going to get into more detail on what constituted those various sessions and a little more detail on our ongoing work on supporting ODE in their multi-tiered system of support effort, or MTSS. So here you can see the particular learning objectives or outcomes for the first two sessions of our dyslexia series, both with ODE and the RELs, or the Regional Early Literacy Specialists. More specifically, session 1 focused on understanding dyslexia. So what is dyslexia? What causes dyslexia? And what are the effects of dyslexia? While the second half of that session focused on universal screening in reading. In other words, best practices in universal screening, digging into levels of instructional support for students and considerations for establishing a screening protocol. Also discussed within universal screening and reading were the behavioral considerations. And those really focused on the characteristics of effective screening, the technical and administrative characteristics, and also the grade level constructs for effective screeners. And we ended that section with sharing some resources for implementation with the idea of applying that content, supporting others in the field to implement these particular practices. Session 2 really focused on database decision methods for planning and implementing intensification practices. We overview the categories of practice for intensifying intervention, and those are change the intervention dosage or time, change the learning environment to promote attention and engagement, combining cognitive processing strategies with academic learning, and then finally modifying the delivery of instruction. And again, just like with the first session, we shared resources for implementation around intensifying instruction, particularly focused on Tier 2 and Tier 3 efforts there. Next, we look at the learning objectives for Session 3 and Session 4. Session 3 focused on homeschool partnerships to support literacy outcomes for students. We talked about the homeschool collaboration within an MTSSR, or multi-tiered system of support for reading. And the main concepts or strategies we unpacked in this session were the ideas of talking and interacting often between home and school, discussing literacy instruction and intervention together from the family member and the educator, the importance of sharing literacy resources, and that's bidirectional. So not just the educator sharing resources with the family member, but the family member feeling comfortable and empowered to share literacy resources that they know of or have heard about with the school and educators as well. And lastly, but importantly, addressing concerns together. The power of being aligned in the goals in supporting students, particularly for those who are having reading difficulties. Session 4, we began with sharing a clip from the Are Dyslexic Children documentary that you heard about earlier from Karen. And then we moved into unpacking the legislation with the participants, going through each section and provision and making sure that they had an opportunity to learn about and ask questions about the proposed legislation. And then we focused majority of our time on the idea of creating joint sense of urgency for improving student literacy outcomes and cross-office coherence for policy implementation. And that included an opportunity for participants to get into breakout groups. Since all of these sessions happened virtually, we tried to utilize as many opportunities for engagement as possible within those platforms. So we frequently structured opportunities for the participants to share their perspectives and to do some joint learning together in small breakout groups and engage in other types of interactive activities. And then we ended that with another clip from our Dyslexic Children documentary, really serving as bookends for this session 4. And then we move on to our final 2 sessions in this series. Again, you see the learning objectives for session 5 and 6 here. Session 5 focused in on core instructional practices, teachers' implementation of evidence-based reading practices within Core 1. So we unpack the components of effective core reading instruction, really focusing on those recommendations from the IES Educator Practice Guide on teaching foundational reading skills. And then we moved into learning about the principles of effective instruction. In other words, explicit and systematic delivery, instructional scaffolding, opportunities for student response, giving instructional feedback, and then finally incorporating judicious practice and cumulative review in the teaching. And then we ended that particular session with a discussion around how to optimize core reading instruction. And we focused on 4 particular strategies there. The first being regular implementation of high quality initial instruction, conducting assessments and making data-driven decisions, differentiated instruction, so what it is and what it looks like within Tier 1 core reading instruction, and then more specifically looking at what we consider to be those alterable variables within core reading instruction within Tier 1 that the general education teacher can employ in order to meet the needs of all students in her classroom. And then we ended with dive into interrogating instructional reading materials. So what tools and strategies are available to help educators and leaders in the field jointly make sound decisions regarding the types of instructional reading materials they're selecting. And coupled with that was the idea of monitoring fidelity of implementation. So while you have all of these effective practices, how does one engage in monitoring and providing feedback to ensure that those practices are being implemented as intended? So as Karen said, we had an opportunity to present those 6 sessions to 2 different related audiences in Ohio. And we also had an opportunity to extend the learning within those sessions at the network meetings that happened, which was an opportunity really to engage in some problems of practice around the topics that they learned. There was some time that passed between the initial professional learning sessions and the network meetings. And so participants had an opportunity to bring those problems of practice to those meetings where we could jointly engage in strategizing and discussions and sharing of resources to support their continued implementation and support of educators and leaders in the field. And we've been recently supporting ODE and their effort to think more deeply about integrated multi-tiered systems of support. And so really the ask or the what here was that ODE was aiming to develop a common definition and framework for multi-tiered systems of support to support all learners across the state of Ohio. And they wanted to do this because the department currently does not have a common framework for state support. Centers and offices across the agency are talking about MTSS differently. So the department was seeking to provide guidance for meeting the needs of all learners through MTSS and to work on aligning the initiatives and supports and resources brought to bear. The MTSS effort holistically within ODE is viewed through a continuous improvement process lens and really is intended to do so at all levels of the education system, from the SEA all the way to the school level. So when we think about the who, in terms of who's involved in this effort, it is the Region 8 Comprehensive Technical Assistance Team, the department represented by cross-office and center leaders, as well as MTSS experts such as researchers or state leaders that may participate as well. So how we're doing this is by facilitating an internal cross-office and cross-center discussion. So we assist ODE in building knowledge and designing an internal plan to develop a statewide model for MTSS. And the process in order to achieve that end is focused on first developing shared understanding across all of those individuals of MTSS. So more specifically, its purpose, the components of it, potential models, and some leading practices. And then moving to reaching consensus on a shared vision, purpose, and internal leadership roles and responsibilities at the agency. Another goal is really to identify any sticking points that might emerge among the members of the agencies, as well as to identify successes and develop some common ground by connecting to existing policy contexts that support MTSS. So in that vein, here you see the ODE efforts that reflect MTSS. So these are various initiatives across ODE that touch MTSS in some way. And what the department is seeking to do through the MTSS initiative is really to begin to compile an inventory of what each office is doing regarding MTSS. And that process has begun. And members of this MTSS design team will be making contributions to that inventory so that there is a comprehensive picture of everything, again, that touches MTSS, and a way to begin to align all of those efforts into one vision for integrated MTSS across the agency and ultimately across the state. So now that we've talked a little bit about the goals of the initiative, we can talk more specifically about the structure of the ODE MTSS sessions that the Region 8 Technical Assistance Team is facilitating. So there's two main parts to the sessions. Part A is focused on a book study that all participants are engaged in, and Part B of the sessions are focused on translating and applying the content learned and ideas learned from that book study into their specific context. So we have had one session so far, and we have a few more sessions throughout the summer. But the objective of the first session was really to define the purpose and components of an integrated academic and behavior support system via the book Integrating Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, Blending RTI and PBIS by McIntosh and Goodman. And the second part of that session was focused on describing select states' implementation of integrated MTSS models. So we thought it would be helpful and determined through conversations with the agency that they would like to see examples and exemplars of states that are already implementing integrated MTSS models. So we shared a couple of state profiles that were shared in the McIntosh and Goodman book, as well as some other examples that we harvested ourselves to really give participants an opportunity to see the breadth of models that exist currently for an integrated system. And when we talk about an integrated MTSS system, one that includes both academic and behavioral supports, we have used the McIntosh and Goodman definition of this particular concept to guide the work with ODE. McIntosh and Goodman say that an integrated MTSS model provides all students with the best opportunities to succeed both academically and behaviorally in school, and that MTSS focuses on providing high quality instruction and interventions matched to student needs across domains and monitoring progress frequently to make decisions about changes in instruction or goals. And what is stressed in the book is that it is not simply about the implementation of both academic RTI and PBIS systems, but really the focus is on the systematic and careful integration of these systems to enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of all school systems. So we carry as a through line, or will be carrying as a through line through our facilitated sessions, are these ideas of making decisions around integration for the purpose of efficiency and effectiveness, not just for integration in and of itself. On behalf of Karen and myself, I'd like to thank you very much for joining our session today.
Thank you, Dr. Sanders and Dr. Sayko. At this time, as you prepare to input your questions into the chat box, I am going to start with the first question for you. And this question is for Dr. Sanders. What are the unique aspects of Ohio's strategy for dyslexia?
Well, thanks for that question. A couple of highlights from our presentation today are around the concept of being systemic and coherent. They're aligned, first of all, to the state plan for all students in Ohio, and also with a comprehensive plan to raise literacy achievement. So all the literacy efforts in Ohio are contained in one plan that is has horizontal alignment, both cross-office and interagency, as well as vertical alignment with regional support teams and local literacy plans that reflect the same priorities. Also, there's a shared sense of priority and sense of urgency around dyslexia, and that comes from several points of view, but particularly the legislation. The recent legislation just passed that had been anticipated for quite some time. And so that brings a focus on early screening and identification as a requirement, as well as a strong sense of parental engagement. And then thirdly, the strategy is leveraged. It addresses many of what might be called root causes of poor student reading performance. And it's leveraged through a focus on adult practices, professional development, and professional learning that's both consistent across audiences and also customized by role. And a strong focus on evidence-based practices, both in early screening and identification, and instructional practices within a multi-tiered system of support. So those are some of the highlights.
Thank you, Dr. Sanders. I see a question in the chat box. Dr. Sayko, what was the reception by teachers to the sessions?
Thank you, Dr. Schuler, and thank you for that question. The individuals who we worked with in the training were both state agency staff and then regional education staff that is supporting teachers in the field. And so there was a wide range of experience and knowledge base across the RELs, as we refer to them, regional early literacy specialists. And so we wanted to really capitalize off of the knowledge base that existed among those professionals. And so specifically around the coaching sessions, they were really wonderful, in my opinion, opportunities to engage in some professional collaborative discussions that tapped into the knowledge and strategies that existed across the RELs. And so therefore provided a forum for sharing strategies and building knowledge and gaps in others' skills and expertise. So We truly were facilitating those sessions and serving as partners and answering the questions. And so they had a different flavor to them than the professional learning series that we provided, which where we were presenting material and then asking the participants to engage with us in the learning. So it ended up being a nice structure to have both the more typical professional learning opportunity followed by the professional learning community sessions, which were really coaching in nature. And we have evaluation results from both of those sessions, and they were very positively received.
Thank you, Dr. Sayko. And Nicole has a follow-up question on that. She wants to know, what was the breakdown of special education and general education teachers who attended the sessions?
That's a great question. Thanks, Nicole. Because these professional learning opportunities were not direct with the actual teachers in the schools and districts, it's a little difficult to answer that question specifically, but what we can say is that in addition to the regional early literacy specialist or RELs, there were other regional staff who participated in these events that have different populations that they serve. And so some of the RELs serve the schools and districts more holistically around coaching others in the field for literacy and language development. And there were some that had adolescent literacy expertise and others who worked more specifically with special education teachers. So I would say in general, there was a wide range, and majority of the regional staff served the needs of both general and special education staff at the local level.
Thank you. And I think that leads to our next question. Can you list some of the individual offices that participated in the cross-office efforts at the department?
Dr. Sanders, you want to start with some of the offices there?
Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Sanders.
There is a state level literacy team that's led by a team that's housed in the Office of Professional Learning. It's a 6-person team. There were several other offices within that same center, focuses on educator preparation. Also, the Office for Exceptional Children was very strongly involved. There's a very strong collaboration there across different systemic grant opportunities and funding opportunities, so they're very much integrated. Also, the Office of School Improvement and the Office of Integrated Student Supports, as well as, let's see, the Office of Assessment, given this legislation has the early screening of identification. And those were the major players, major participants.
Thank you, Dr. Sanders, and thank you for those questions. I'll ask one. How is Ohio's approach similar or different from the policies and practices that you see other states with dyslexia laws undertaking?
Okay, that's a great question. And really, in my opinion, ODE's approach in collaboration with state and regional partners centers on building capacities to implement its plan to raise literacy achievement for all learners through dyslexia professional learning. It's piloting some draft model guidebooks that it's developing. It's establishing a peer coaching system, and really was early, I think, to the game in supporting those in the field around implementing evidence-based literacy practices within remote learning environments. So the Office of Teaching and Learning was really proactive and early about thinking about the atypical learning conditions that were faced due to the pandemic, and were really proactive about thinking about how they can put some guidance out as an agency to support educators. So in addition to everything that I just mentioned, I think really ODE's dedicated to strengthening its professional learning and technical assistance network and offering regular high quality opportunities and resources for professionals at all levels of the system. And examples of this is through its annual Literacy Academy that's now in its 4th year. It has the monthly regional literacy network meetings that we participated in. And they also have developed some online literacy toolkits for educators at different levels, including families and caregivers and parents. So its approach really emphasizes technical assistance and support versus compliance, which is really a hard shift for state agencies to make, and it has successfully done so thus far.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sanders. We have another question from Ivy. There are some big differences of opinions between the way special education professionals view literacy instruction and the way literacy professionals view it. It seems to come to a head when considering dyslexia. Did your conversations with the RELs yield insights that modified special educators' views in any way?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you for that. And yes, there's quite a bit of dialogue and conversation around different perspectives. And actually, that I think was at the heart of the design, the early design of this professional learning series, is to bring those perspectives together. And there was, concern or some documentation that different staff from those two points of view were giving conflicting answers in the field. So through the design of this cohesive professional learning series around shared practices and supports, we think that it made quite a bit of headway into sort of bringing those two perspectives together. And I was going to say something else. So yeah, that's, we'll see how that goes. I don't think that, we're sort of going into the next stage, leaning forward into what will come next with dyslexia, and we'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if that continues to be something that we need to attend to as the work progresses. Sarah, did you have any thoughts about specifically the difference in perspectives between the two points of view?
Nothing specifically to add to what you said, Karen, but I will say that I think we were using the proposed dyslexia law in Ohio to really ground conversations around what the provisions within the law meant, and breaking and operationalizing it to address some of those either misconceptions or gaps in knowledge. And I think that's important because the ability to contextualize it for a state, make it less abstract, and really thinking about policy implementation becomes really important, and it's often an overlooked aspect of implementation. And so instead of going from the law directly to what teachers do in the field, it's important to think about how is the law being translated at the state level, and how is the state providing guidance to support those in the field to make sense of the legislation so that they can implement it as intended. So that's what we were really striving to do in conjunction with ODE.
Can you tell us about some of the barriers you faced in putting together this systematic structure from the state to the district down to the classroom at the school level? What were some of the barriers you faced?
Karen, do you want to take that one first and I can jump in?
Yeah. Well, this has evolved over a number of years. And so it's not, the state plan for literacy, was number of years in development. So I think it was, because of strong vision and a strong commitment in Ohio over many years for literacy. I think, it evolved in a very systematic way. In the early stages of pulling together the statewide system of support, there was leadership that envisioned an integrated system with the Office of Exceptional Children, as just mentioned, and school improvements and professional learning, that those needed to come together, and they aligned and braided some funding sources at that time and worked through many of what you would anticipate would be early challenges there. And there was a strong parent advocate group, for example, in the exceptional children side of things, who was very vocal about that it was taking funds away from the needs of students with disabilities. So I guess the short answer is all of the barriers and challenges that you might anticipate, they probably were faced here as well. And I think it was, the fact there was strong leadership and vision and commitment that allowed it to evolve to where it is today. And I will say there are still challenges, not like you work through them and then, everything's smooth sailing. They keep coming up. So that's
Thank you.
Excellent thing to keep in mind, that this is a process.
Absolutely. And I encourage you to take a look at the resources that Dr. Sayko and Dr. Sanders have provided for us. They're excellent, excellent resources. Do we have any more questions? Any more questions at this time for Dr. Sayko or Dr. Sanders? Thank you. At this time, I would like to thank you all for joining us. I would like to thank Dr. Sayko and Dr. Sanders for this great work that they're doing for the children that we serve. And we hope that this has been an educational session for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Dr. Schuler, thank you.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.